as we navigate this sort of present moment, I think there's something extraordinary about recognizing that, yes, we are all, for probably the first time in recorded history, more or less preoccupied to a certain extent with the same thing. And I think that definitely has a profound impact on our futures together. However, I want to be really careful of not universalizing this notion that we're all in it together or we're all experiencing the same thing. The reality is injustice, systemic violence, colonialism, so on and so forth, means there are people who are particularly vulnerable in this moment, for whom the choices to remain safe and to care for one another are not so easily made, for whom this is more than binge watching Netflix and a mild inconvenience. And I also want us to remember that the great majority of Indigenous people are far more likely to die from this pandemic, and that is situated within a context of disease and genocide and institutional violence that will mean that whatever interventions we design and however our futures look like moving forward, Indigenous peoples and Indigenous frameworks need to be at the center of that. So I will stop here with the land acknowledgement. If you have questions, you can always reach out to me about it afterwards. I can share whatever resources or tools I have at my disposal with you. So today's conversation, I had the great pleasure of connecting with the organizers and the other panelists in preparation for today. Folks have shared a lot of really wonderful things that they're up to, have shared a lot of really insightful thoughts, really generous and vulnerable reflections in that conversation. And I look forward to creating that kind of space again. To give us a sense of what everybody's up to at this particular moment, I'd love to invite our panelists one by one to share what they're working on. As they do so, they'll unmute their microphones and their cameras, and they'll give us a brief introduction of themselves and a sort of a little bit of a look at what they've been doing at this present moment. So I'd like to begin with Julie. Julie, if you can join us and share a bit about your work and yourself. That would be
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. This is really such a pleasure and a privilege. So yes, my name is Julie Tepperman. I identify my artistic hyphens, I guess, would be playwright, actor, educator, and co-artistic leader of Convergence Theatre with Aaron Willis, who also is my husband. And we employ a 2.5-year-old and a 3-month-old at the moment as our assistants, which has been interesting in this work from home situation. And we, as a company, since founding and establishing ourselves in 2006, we've been working in what I would describe as immersive or even before that, site-specific work. And that has been a very interesting challenge in the face of this present moment. And so I'm pleased to talk to you as we move on about 2 projects that is all under the umbrella of what we've called Converge Against Corona. One is our phone play cycle that just launched last week called the Corona Variations. And one is a community artist outreach program matching artists and patrons that I'll talk a little bit about in a bit, called the COVID Commissions.
Thank you so much, Julie, for sharing a bit about your work at this present moment. I think you're up to some exciting things, and we look forward to hearing more from you. In particular, personally, I've been really intrigued about the conversations that we had around how do you translate the intimacy of your practice and your company in all these different ways, and what does that look like in the future for you. So we look forward to hearing more from you. I would love to, at this point, invite Nicholas to share a bit about what you're working on, up to, and what you've been thinking through at this particular moment.
Hi, I'm Nicholas Rose. Thank you, Rania. I'm dancer with the National Ballet of Canada. I'm in the Corps de Ballet. I'm coming up on my 2-year anniversary living in Canada. I'm originally from Florida, though I moved from New York City, dancing with the Dance Theater of Harlem. During this time, it's been pretty interesting, but eye-opening to say the least. I actually can't say anything negative in my personal life about what is happening because, like what was said earlier, there are people who are going through things far more difficult than us, and they have far more variables held against them. that average people truly just don't, like when it comes to just having a roof over your head. These are things that I think we're all noticing that we have taken for granted. So I think this is a humbling experience for all. During this time, I've actually taken a big chunk of my life and dedicated it to focusing on my mental health, thus being able to help a lot of other people focus on their mental health too. Close friends, family members, and even distant people who have reached out to me through Instagram. And what's amazing is before actually the quarantine happened, I was on a leave of absence from the company to focus on my health. And my grandfather had passed away in December. My mom was in Florida. My brother and sister live on opposite sides of the country. And I thought, I really feel like I need to get my mind right because everything seems a bit cloudy. And it just seemed like a great time to work on myself. And I developed this love for writing. I had no idea that I even had. And it's interesting when you grow up, you're being told that you can't do certain things, you agree to it, and then you actually do everything in your power to ensure that you can't do it. And so I've been breaking all of these falsehoods about myself and learning new languages. I'm taking Spanish. It's like pretty awesome. No, but at the end of the day, it's really what you do with your time. During this period, I've gotten really into self-administered EMDR. When I was in Florida, I had an in-person psychotherapist that I worked with. And for those who don't know, EMDR is eye movement desensitization reprogramming. There was a study developed in the 90s by French scientists, I believe, having to do with the REM sleep eye moving pattern that goes where your eyes actually go side to side of the deepest part of your sleep. So when you can process the most information from the day before. So it basically gives you an opportunity to process things that have happened in your life and clears up your present day. So that really helped me with a lot of trauma that I've experienced, whether it be in the dance world and my personal life. And since then, I've actually just been on this total quest of just learning more about myself. One little thing that I love to do, I have like little sticky notes that are really encouraging words, and every little sticky note is a different color. And I have things like, someone's watching over you. You're not in danger. Because I feel like when we're in one place for so long, we feel like someone's coming to get us or something. Because it happens, And there's another one that says, if you plant the seed today, you're not going to see the fruit today. So that has also helped me, like just gauging my time wisely and knowing that everything that I'm trying to work on right now, it won't come into fruition tomorrow, but it will eventually. And this is a great time. Use this time wisely. Been taking class, stretching. Yeah.
So much, Nicholas. I'm really excited to dive deeper into conversation with you, particularly around wellness and how the ways that you've been thinking around your own well-being have also enabled you to connect with a broader community and to find that sort of connection, closeness in digital spaces. And I'm also super looking forward to hearing about all the multidisciplinary art projects that you've undertaken in this moment and all the different aspects of your identity as an artist. So thank you so much for that introduction.
Thank you. I'm muting myself.
Thank you. At this point, I'd love to invite Nick to share with us a bit of background on their work and their practice as an artist and what they're doing at this present moment.
Hi, thank you for the intro. And thank you all so much for having me on here and giving me a reason to change out of the same Adidas hoodie that I've been wearing for like 6 straight days. So I appreciate it. So my name is Nick Green. I use he, him, and they, them pronouns. And I am a playwright that lives in Toronto. I'm also the creator of the Social Distancing Festival, which is a website that's been around now for about 5, going on 6 weeks, that showcases the work of artists who have had artistic work canceled, delayed, postponed, or otherwise disrupted due to the need for distancing and the spread of COVID. And it has been a wild, wild ride. It started the day that I learned that a musical I was co-writing with composer Kevin Wong was being canceled at the end of our first week of rehearsal. And it was born out of a need to find a way to connect with community and have an artistic outlet for work that would keep me creative and out of the dark place that I know I can go to. So it's been really cool. It's picked up a lot of momentum around the world. We have posts from many different disciplines of art from cities everywhere. We have a live stream directory that we update every day, mostly featuring independent artists. And we've just started a new project, which is launching this time next week, called Long Distance Art, where I've paired up artists of different disciplines in different cities around the world with the task of collaborating on a new piece of work, interdisciplinary artistic work that sort of speaks to the times that we're in. And they aren't all totally done yet, but I've seen elements of all of them, and they are so cool. Like, I really, really can't wait to put that out to the world.
Thank you so much, Nick. I think I'm really excited to sort of really understand the international impact and like the ways in which we're now rethinking what's possible for us as collaborators and as artists, and what our communities mean when we don't have access to our traditional spaces or our physical spaces. So I would love to use that as a pivot and a moment to ask folks how they're thinking about connecting, how they're finding the spaces to collaborate, how we're finding closeness and intimacy and all of the extraordinary things that our practice as artists typically affords us. So Nick, if I can get you to carry on with that and spark the conversation for us.
Yeah, sure. I think that we're in a really interesting time for artistic collaboration. Like, first of all, the artists in my community who are next door to me or down the road are in a way just as close to me as artists in other cities around the world. You know, I'm going out of my place for exercise occasionally and essential trips, but otherwise I'm home. So the new friends and artists I'm meeting through the site are in a lot of ways just as close by. And what I've seen in the long distance art series is some artists who I don't think would have connected otherwise, finding really, really interesting topics to explore artistically. So for instance, there's a textile artist in Calgary named Simone Saunders who is collaborating with a multimedia design artist in Cleveland, named Takiki Walker. And both of these artists identify as Black women, and they have embarked on a collaboration that is inspired by a Washington Post article about these Black men who were run out of a Walmart for wearing masks. And in their collaboration, they talk about the experience of racialized people at the time of COVID across borders, where they can discuss different sort of geographically based experiences of racism in the time of a pandemic, but also really come together on how to present that artistically in a way that they wouldn't have been able to do without focused time to sit and meet other artists through digital means. So I think there are a lot of really interesting opportunities to deepen political and artistic discussions that I don't know we would be engaging in the same way if it weren't for the context that we're living in.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's been really interesting to think about how our concept of space have drastically changed. What's distance now, right? And where we thought we didn't have shared experiences or shared frames of reference with people in all kinds of places, we're finding the ability to connect with that. I actually want to ask Nicholas about this, because I think you've taken sort of an intimate, interpersonal approach to this, and I know that some of your work has looked at really being able to share what your experiences are. as a Black man and in ballet. So I'd love for you to speak to us about that. And because I think Nick brought up the intersections of who artists are in their lives and in their bodies and in their experiences so aptly. And I'd love to hear your insight on that.
Yeah, you want to know something that I actually had the realization? It's really important that you do not put your external identification matched with who you are on the inside. It will actually ruin everything. I'm really serious about that. I'll get into that right now and I'll tell you. So growing up in Florida, being Black and gay at the same time, that isn't necessarily it's not widely accepted. I've never actually been mad at myself about my sexuality, and both of my parents have never been mad at me about my sexuality. So that always been nice. But when you're in school, people are absolutely cruel. So through time, I just felt that there has been a lot of mindsets that I really didn't feel up until I was having to be in a public setting. Like when I would be doing dance alone in my house, I would feel like I would get more out of it than being in a classroom with a teacher that is telling you you're not going to be able to do this because you're Black. Or they will say it in a covert fashion, because just like there's racism in Canada that's covert, there's racism in Florida that is extremely extroverted and very covert. So, I mean, the covert racism that I experienced was, oh, I feel that you should just do modern because there's more of a likelihood you'll get a job than if you do ballet. My response has always been, no, I've never been interested in modern. I've always liked ballet because, mind you, I started cello when I was 7. So my whole life has been centered around classical music. And so ballet was just the ultimate opposite of that, is not just playing it, being able to dance to the music. And I just really couldn't comprehend at the time, why do they keep saying no? Why do they keep holding me back? I didn't even realize until years later. I mean, you basically develop this mindset that you can't achieve this because of the color of your skin. And if you do achieve something, they literally tell you, you only got that because of the color of your skin. So damned if you do, damned if you don't. Okay. And I remember I would be bullied not only by students, but parents would call the school complaining. Why are you going to let him into the school for double major? Because I was the first person to double major for ballet and music at my middle school in Florida. And so many parents were infuriated. Why is it that you can let him do that? It's because he's Black. Da, 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 da. So I was actually taking on their poison as my own. And it totally almost mutilated my entire mindset. And up until recently, I had to completely dispel the fact that I only have this job because I'm Black, or I am only a good dancer at this level because I'm Black. I have this job because I work hard and I have excellent ballet technique. That actually has nothing to do with the color of my skin, because there are people who are just as capable as me, as I am, who are not doing anything simply because they didn't believe. And then there are also people who are more capable than me, way more capable than me, who are not doing something simply because they didn't believe. So, it really has to do, you have to really focus on yourself and know that I was able to detach who I thought I was and what I went through from my childhood. I had to literally detach it. And the minute I was able to do that, so much liberation and such a sense of self-restoration came over my body. And one thing I was working with my therapist on was, when you're able to focus on just self-restoration, your need for reconciliation depletes to nothing. I had no need to want to say, you were racist, da, 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 da. When I was back in Florida, actually, I went to the very middle school that tore me down mentally. And I taught class for all those level 1 students, because they put all the people of color in level 1, the lowest level, and they gave us more modern than ballet classes. So I was deprived of ballet. can you speak on how that enabled you to connect with people at the time of COVID? Oh, wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Because honestly, the healing process of this has gotten me into reaching out to a lot of my friends who have also gone through trauma in their dance life and how it's affected them. I have a lot of friends who I grew up in boarding school with that literally do not dance or quit abruptly simply because their brain couldn't take it anymore. And I've been reaching out to my friends and I've been telling them about this amazing therapy that I've been doing, EMDR. And that has been a life-changing thing. When I tell you that the trauma in my life that I've experienced is just basically when you do your the bilateral motion and you provide a conscious thought of trauma and you bring it to your frontal cortex, when you're able to actually make justified decisions versus it being stuck in the back in your critter brain area, you're able to seriously see that everything is almost warped. It's almost been warped. When people tell you things that you don't actually know knowledge about, you believe it because children are so impressionable. And it's actually shocking when you do these patterns, a lot of things from your past come back up, and thus being able to bring it out to the open. And I feel like I've just become a lot more transparent as a person and being able to help people. And a lot of people have been reaching out to me about how am I able to maintain my sanity in my apartment. And honestly, the answer to this is this: know that you're not alone. Know that even though we have different variables of intensity that we're dealing with, we all very much so need each other. Like, I'm putting Post-its on my wall that's telling me it's going to be all right. You want to know why? Because it helps me. Might not help somebody else, but it definitely helps me just to be able to know that, oh, okay, I'm still in this. We're still doing this. I have my cello. We're doing classes. I'm working on putting together a nice cool down exercise for the essential workers at the hospital, at the children's hospital. So at the end of their shifts, they can have a nice cool down and breathe and reflect on the day that they've had so they can take time to appreciate themselves, because I know for a fact people like them are deprived of time for them to appreciate the hard work that they do because they have no time. So this is the biggest honor I think I've ever gotten to do. And I'm going to be able to do it in my backyard. So yeah, we don't have a big building at the Four Seasons Center, but my heart is racing, right? So it's all right. It is.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think it's a lot of your experiences, when you were speaking, I was like, yes, because, I'm an interdisciplinary artist.
And you had a beautiful land acknowledgement, by the way. I give the land acknowledgement to the National Ballet. So I pretty much remember, it was amazing. It was beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's always a work in progress. I felt really like deep gratitude for, really, I related to a lot of your experiences. Also, I have a dance background as well, and I remember as a young dancer, coming to competition and automatically being told, oh, you're here for hip hop, right? Like that was.
Oh, it's so damaging, right? It's so damaging.
It is, absolutely. And I think so many of us artists, spend a lot of time contending with other people's definitions of who we are as people and also who we are as artists and what kind of work we're capable of producing. And I think right now we're being afforded the space to have these conversations and really understand the life of the artist. And I know that for Julie, this moment has presented you with opportunities for connection personally, as well as opportunities to be this sort of meeting place and to be the connector for communities of artists. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, it's been really surprising, the response, wonderfully overwhelming. About, I've lost track of time, right? 3 weeks ago, a month ago, I'm not sure anymore. I had kind of a creative manic episode over the course of a weekend where I had been coming off of the first week of childcare and navigating the work from home thing with my partner and brewing this idea and then put it out into the world. And within the first 24 hours, we had 50 artists on our roster. And it wasn't a call for submissions. There's no vetting. There's no need to send me a resume or anything like that. It was just basically the premise, which I will qualify. The premise we started with was artists need work. Audiences or humans need art. I will qualify that by saying some artists need or want to be working and creating right now, and some people want art. I think the longer this goes on, the greater the desire for art consumption, maybe away from screens, might be, depending how long we're in this communal global situation. But a lot of people responded to the call, and what was really heartening was after the first couple of days, to this moment, it's mainly people I don't know, artists who are new to me from across the country and some into the States, which is really exciting. So my job has been to connect artists and patrons. We invited patrons to pay a minimum bid to donate a minimum of $75. $50 will go directly to the artist to make them something. The other $25 would go into the pool, the profit share pool for the actors involved in the phone play cycle, the Corona variations. And a lot of people were giving way more than that, which was very heartening. And my job was I don't think of myself as a curator, but it was interesting if I knew the artist or knew the patron to try to make those connections. Sometimes the patron, mostly they were open to anything, but sometimes they were very specific. So once an artist could tell me what medium they wanted to work in, there was kind of that matchmaking. They had about 5 days to a week to make it. And the most remarkable pieces have come in. We're in the process with our web designer, Colin Simmons, of trying to get a virtual gallery up in the next few weeks. So far, we have 88 pieces that have been commissioned and artists that have been paid to do it and matched with the patrons. And I have a waiting list of almost 100 artists. And we're out of money. That's the thing. That's always the thing with self-producing on a project by project basis, because the money we raised $12,000 in the first 3 weeks. And the bank account now is pretty much at zero because all of the money went into the hands of the commissioned artist. And then the rest of it went into the hands of, so far, the 12 actors who have participated in the first round of the Corona variations. So now I find myself in a position to keep fundraising and balance the challenge of that with fundraising for people who are new to me, which is amazing. And also fundraising for my own creative endeavor so I could pay the people I've invited to join me in the plays. So it's really an interesting balance right now of my own personal fulfillment of writing these plays and bringing a team together, and then the responsibility that comes with that in terms of the leadership of really taking care of people, taking care of the actors, taking care of the audience who buys a ticket for an actor to phone them from a block number straight to their home phone. That's a huge kind of invitation towards intimacy and a huge moment of consent between all parties. So there's a huge responsibility there. I find myself juggling, as well as the consent negotiation involved between the artists and the patrons, because both the artists and the patrons can choose to remain anonymous. They can choose to be connected via me to each other. Many of them have begun emailing. Or a visual artist, for instance, was commissioned to make something for a painting based on a photograph of a couple's grandchildren who they really missed, and they've maintained a kind of relationship, which was cool. So unexpected connections for me personally, and that I'm witnessing evolve through the intimacy involved in both streams of these projects.
Thank you so much, Julie. I know that for so many of us, we are navigating our collective well-being and navigating everything from escapism to healing to documentation to just trying to articulate a lot of the grief that we're all feeling at this moment, a lot of the uncertainty, a lot of the fear, and a lot of maybe the excitement at what lies ahead for our future together. But I know that artists have been instrumental to my navigating that, and my own arts practice has been instrumental to that as well. But I also think for so many of us, we have an opportunity at this moment to ask ourselves some really big questions about the role that art has in the world, about the value of art in the world, about what art making and what art spaces and what art institutions might look like in the future. And then what kind of leadership we can take around that. I know that both yourself and Nick had sort of thoughts around this in terms of how do you keep doing this? what's your role in that? How do you present without gatekeeping? How do we connect without curating? How do we sort of exit a lot of the structures that we've been conditioned into? So I'd love to hear from people of like, what are the questions that you're asking yourself right now in your practice as an artist, and what are the things that you're learning about yourself and you're learning about being an artist in the world? So I know, for example, for me, the nice reminder that I got during this moment is that I am an artist with or without my play getting mounted, and I share with Nick in the feeling of like feeling deflated at having like really, and I don't think people really know, particularly I'm a little biased, Nick, because I too am a playwright, in terms of like recognizing or knowing intimately the work that goes into it, and like knowing how long it takes before you get to put something into production, and like, you know, and like the hundreds and hundreds of hours of like, and the revisions and the reworking and the dramaturgy and just like the labor that goes into it. And then to have this structure around it sort of fall apart, and then to lose access to that space. So how is that changing your practice? What are the questions that you're asking yourself? And what do you think is possible for our future in the art world? I know I asked you all the big questions back to back, but...
Yeah, at a time when I'm still trying to figure out when I'm going to be able to get my hair cut, you know? So like what questions about the future, I'm always like, oh my gosh, like my opinion on that seems to be changing even more than daily, like hourly. You speak so accurately about the process of creating theater and being a playwright. Now, Julie's a playwright as well. And it is the amount of hours that goes into developing a show before it even has a chance to have an audience. And if you're fortunate enough that you have a production company or a dramaturge or anyone engaged in your development, there is an element of that is also about how to craft a show that's right for their audience. And it's an interesting process, because if I want to work with that company, then I should want their audience to like my show because I'm one of their audience members. But, you know, being a Canadian playwright isn't exactly a position of like turning down work. Like usually you're just like, whatever, I'll write for anybody. So something that's interesting about the online forum that I've been thinking a lot about is it's a place where people come to your work rather than you bringing your work to their home, right? So when a company is producing your work, there's a subscriber base there that has been going there. That's part of their tradition, part of their engagement in the arts, and has been for maybe even longer than you've been writing professionally. So there is almost a responsibility and a process of bringing your work to them. The problem is a lot of people get left behind in that because those audiences represent a certain experience, a certain perspective. And so if your voice is not one that organically fits with that audience, you might not have a chance to bring your work there. What I am priding myself on and the work that's being done at Social Distancing Festival is it represents a huge diversity of voice and artistic expression, like right down to discipline, down to even like within, we don't just do, you know, contemporary art or modern art or this, but even within that, you could break that down into the many different expressions of that type of that specific type or niche of work. And so really, I think that people are going on there because they've seen a post or they've heard of an artist who's being featured and they know they like their work, but then they find themselves looking at the work of so many other people who practice in such a different way. And I feel like maybe even taking a chance, and it might even be an opportunity where they're going, my God, like I had this all wrong. If this play had been out there and I saw an ad for it in Now Magazine, I wouldn't have gone because I wouldn't have even walked in the door. I wouldn't have bought that ticket because I don't think that's my thing. But now that it's here, positioned next to this thing that I did think is my thing, I'm going to give it a chance, realize I like it, go down the rabbit hole of seeing what else this artist has done, what else this genre is all about. And it's very cool. I find it very exciting. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. There's also times where you see that thing you don't think you like, and you're like, yeah, I still don't like it. But like, that happens. It's all worth it, in my opinion, because you might discover that thing that kind of blows open your perspective a little bit, or realize how much more you relate to that like diverse or different voice that you initially thought, well, that artist has nothing to say to me because I'm not the same as them, Yeah.
Hey, thank you. I think it's really interesting the ways that we're at this moment have an opportunity to sort of challenge the cultural order, to challenge the traditional gatekeepers, to challenge this sort of, we tend to think that in the art world, there's a neutral, objective, and righteous sifter that through critical consensus brings the best artwork to the top, right? Artwork that's objectively good. But in reality that, I know from my experience at my intersections, I'm a Black woman who's an artist. My friend Kamal would say being an artist, a Black artist, is a high privilege and a deep pain. So in most often you're sort of navigating the realities of your life, which you often get to use in your work. But at the same time, you're being limited by a lot of structures around you. Your audience is always assumed to be a particular person. And that isn't necessarily who you're making your work for. That isn't necessarily the critical eye that you want to present your work to. So I definitely think we have an opportunity to find our audience. And I also think we're being presented with new challenges, right? In the ways in which we can't just take it online, because what does that mean for accessibility, right? But also what opportunities does that present for accessibility? How many creators and cultural producers who literally couldn't physically get into our buildings can we collaborate with now? And how can we make sure that we hold on to whatever progress we make in these times so that our relationships, our connections, and our future collaborations in the after time don't go back to the ways that they were before? So I'd love to turn it over to Nicholas and ask you, what are the questions that you're asking yourself now? What are the lessons that you're learning? What's possible for our future together?
Well, first of all, it's interesting. This morning I was asking myself, Nicholas, it feels as though you want to go into several different directions, which is great. But haven't you always wondered what it's like to actually reflect? So we never really get time to actually reflect on much of anything because we're constantly being pulled in different directions in our everyday lives. And as I've gotten so excited about learning new different things about me, I think this is a great time to practice what reflection really is and going back and going over things again. So as with my therapy, starting tonight, because I like to do my therapy at night. It helps me with my sleep too. Get a better night's rest when you're able to get things off your chest. It really helps. So try to do that between 6 p.m. and later, But I like to write a lot, and I'm trying to really ask myself those uncomfortable questions. And with that being said, to ask yourself those uncomfortable questions, you have to really go back in time and figure out, was it really that things were happening to me, or was I actually making things happen to me because that's the only kind of lifestyle that I knew? And so then there came a point when you look back, you're like, oh, wow. Reflection really shows how we do block some of our blessings. And it's amazing and empowering, though, because then you're able to be so much more open to what's right in front of you, because then you don't want to repeat what you've seen in the past and experienced in the past. I was watching when you were mentioning Netflix documentaries, I was like, okay, guilty. I was watching a documentary. I've just been watching animal documentaries, not anything with dialogue. Actually, if it has dialogue, it's a Spanish TV show. I don't really watch anything with English because it just kind of I feel bored. So it has to be either foreign or about animals. I'm actually about to foster some kittens soon. So anyways, I found that there was this really interesting quote that said, the only living organisms on the planet that can't learn from their mistakes after the first time are human beings. I just thought that's hilarious because it's true. Every animal learns the first time because the next time they mess up, it'll usually cost them their life or their family's lives. So I thought that interesting. They don't really have that choice, and we really do. So I thought that really sparked something in my brain. Okay, really take advantage of the fact that you can really learn from your mistakes. And yeah, I feel like animals have been really inspiring me lately. It's like interesting. I'm like looking at the squirrels. And as we notice, they're all unbothered. We're the ones who are going crazy, right? A little bit crazy. The squirrels are living their best life. They're like, get out of my way. I'm living my life. Throw me bread.
They're digging my garden up.
They're just they're loving it, you know? And I'm like, you know what? I'm getting inspired by these squirrels because they're so present. They keep it moving. They don't stop and ponder. They just keep it moving. And they're jumping off of trees and all that. I mean, I wish I could jump off of trees. But can't win it all, can you?
Thank you so much for that, Nicholas. I think nature has been also like a huge point of connection for me. I think it's been wonderful at this moment to recognize. It feels like everything has been upended. And because it's spring, you learn the lesson that life splinters forward always, whether or not you were part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been really extraordinary, is like as difficult as it's been and as many real barriers as there are being generated for me and far more for other people by this particular moment. That's been the sort of the ever-present, the garden lessons that I've been learning about people and myself, which is, the first thing is that when we're not thriving in our practice, we should ask ourselves the same questions that we ask when we're growing something, is not what's wrong with the plant, but what's wrong with its environment and how can we transform that.
So true.
And then secondly, that so often we tend to measure ourselves by these, like, here are these things that I need to do, that why are they not manifesting and how are they not transforming. And the reality is things take time to blossom, and everything blooms in its season. And then the final garden lesson, which is that sometimes you're growing passively, and now that you have a moment of self-reflection, you get to learn how much you've grown as an artist in your practice, how much you've picked up, and to value and appreciate yourself, because more blooms in the garden than the gardener planted. And so I think that's like the moment of like allowing ourselves to like take a deep breath and be grateful for who we are as artists, outside of whether or not we're able to produce in this particular moment. Because I think there's also tremendous pressure to like, now you have the time, create the art. And it's like, now I have the time, but I don't have and I'm reliving that. Now I have the time, but I'm like momming 24/7. Yeah. I'm literally at home, like trying to like do revision and giving up 500 snacks. Like that's what I'm doing right now. Man. So the reality is remembering that the artist has a full life. And I know, Julie, you've got a full life going on for you right now. And you're also, thinking through your practice as an artist. And I think often in our heads, when we imagine the artist, we don't imagine the artist as a parent or caregiver. And particularly that's a pretty gendered imagination. And therefore the spaces we make for artists are not always conducive to that. So I want to ask you what's possible in our future together. What are you asking yourself at this particular moment?
It's interesting. I'm glad you bring up the artist as parent, the parent artist thing, because I mean, I'm not on any social media, so I honestly don't know what conversations are going on right now in that realm. I know what conversations I'm having personally with my friends who are also in the artist parent situation. And what's become so clear is that the supports all of us worked hard to get in place, and in particular, like the support of family, though they might be there, emotionally and just a phone call or a Zoom call away, physically, like we've lost our babysitters, we've lost we're so fortunate to be part of a subsidized City of Toronto daycare program, and we've lost that. But also it makes me think about the moments, before we were in a subsidized daycare situation where we were bringing our first daughter, before we had two of them, to rehearsals, and she was being passed around and held by a lot of people, and kind of growing up dancing to the music that was in the room being rehearsed or whatever. And how for our second child, it's going to be a very different next couple of years, however long this goes on. So how do we, through the art that we're practicing and bringing into our home on a personal level, how do we bring our children and community home? Because so much of the work, I'm just recognizing how so much of the work was happening, like as a playwright, it's always in a way for a certain amount of time in isolation at, at your computer alone, or writing the grants to try to fund yourself to be able to keep going with the work, or finding other creative ways to subsidize yourself. And the time, I always say the time spent, and I feel this as a producer, also making the work happen creatively versus making the actual work, being in the rehearsal hall, so to speak, with other people, that balance is way off. But now every single inch of my living space is also the creation space in a way that I've had to bring people in. And then, I'm kind of transitioning, like that's, a challenge. We all know if you're navigating family, that's just a complete challenge. And I feel like I'm always neglecting someone or something. I continue to be super obsessed with the kind of premise of our company, or how the curiosity nugget that began us, which was pushing the boundaries of intimacy between the performers, the audience, and the space that we're in. And now it's been really fascinating. We've only done 6 trials of it, but having an actor or 2 actors sometimes self-isolating together call from a block number a single patron, knowing that they're the only person on the line unless they actually choose to add someone to the call. And we've heard of some parties that have been happening, some multiple adding, which is really cool, as well as just some individuals doing the experience on their own. And I think there's something super intimate about this moment in time. Some people, we only know how well it goes based on the feedback that we get. And some people have articulated that they found it wonderfully cathartic. Other people really found the voyeurism of like the interactive we have a number of pieces you're just kind of a fly on the wall, so to speak, and you're just listening, and other ones you're interacting. You get a script in advance, or there's a moment of improv. And people found that really freeing, kind of escape from the current moment. And other people reflected on the catharsis felt by dropping into someone else's grief, anxiety, or pain for a moment. So I think we've learned this week, just as like a company of artists putting on these shows, what it means to put something out into the world, and also really quickly. So just to finish, to speak with what Nick was talking about, like the endless workshopping, and also like thinking about past systems, as you mentioned, Renia, the granting, for us, we're on project grants, not operating. So twice a year, we get an opportunity to apply for grants for our projects. There's a 4-month waiting period, whether we find out if we have the funding or not. And that only makes up a very small part of our pie. Box office only makes up a very small part of our pie. So there are lots of other things we need to do that takes usually at least minimum 2 years to put a project out there. So that's been a really interesting observation, to have plays that are a week old, that have had 90 minutes of rehearsal, being put out into the world for public consumption. Feels very terrifying and vulnerable, but also it's very in response to this moment. And there's no funding, like there are no grants at the moment, or very few. There are popping up, and I'm sure we'll start to see more opportunities for artists to apply for funding for work that responds to this current moment as it is ever evolving. But at the moment, we're just putting stuff out and relying very heavily on patronage. So that's another thing I'm thinking about. Like we talk about the gatekeepers. So there's so many artist-driven companies in this country, across the city and across the country, who exist, maybe not because, I know certainly for us, we never wanted to run a business. That was kind of the result of putting out work again and again and building a kind of, dare I say, brand, certainly building an audience very slowly over time through very often very personal, intimate connections with audience again and again. So suddenly we find ourselves responsible and enjoying the position of leadership to be offering people work and to be paying people. But then the gatekeepers of the funding is a whole other thing. So I don't know, in this moment, will people who have disposable income or funds they would normally be spending on tickets to go and gather in a space, it'll be really interesting to see where people decide to put their own money into the hands of artists, as opposed to into institutions or buildings, etc. So I don't know, we're in a really interesting moment of change that, though I wish the circumstances of the world were different, obviously, I think there's something, dare I say, exciting, but certainly vital and necessary about some changes that I think need to be happening, and a lot of reassessing in the community. I hate to speak broadly. I can only speak from my experience, but I just, it's an interesting moment of change right now that I feel I'm constantly navigating.
Thank you so much for your insights, Julie. I think there's been a lot of things that you've said that have connected with a number of points that both Nick and Nicholas made. For me, there's a lot of things that I've picked up on all of the extraordinary contributions you've all made. Predominantly, it's been really getting the space to reclaim our power as artists and as people, and to really redefine for ourselves how we want to work, what is possible for us. It's challenging our imaginations, it's challenging our resources, it's challenging our capacities, because we are being presented with a world that is vastly different than the world that many of us have known. However, the reality is, for some artists, this has always been the ways that they've connected with the world, the ways that they've created, the ways they've been forced to find community where there hasn't been that access for them where they already are. I also think it's been really interesting to think about, at this point, artists are remembering themselves outside of capitalism and outside of scarcity and outside of having to fight for resources, and reminding ourselves that we are philosophers, we're revolutionaries, we're historians, we're healers. And at this particular moment, we're enabling people to do a number of things, which is to document their present moments. And I also think it's been transcending what we think of as art, and what is possible within particular mediums or forms. And largely that's been part of it has been as a result of international collaboration, like Nick and the Social Distance Festival are being able to facilitate for people. That, I think, has enabled us to think that there's different ways of knowing and being, that what we might think of as classical music in a particular frame of reference, someone else is not thinking of in that way. You know, I get the opportunity to teach in a number of arts programs, and I teach, I spent some time at the Banff Center teaching in Ensemble Evolution, which is a music program. And in that program, it's really interesting to think about, you're bringing some of these people who are all contemporary classical musicians, people working in new music, and from different places in the world. Where I say classical music, I literally mean Sudanese classical music. And then people will say, well, why don't you say folk music? And I'm like, well, it's the oldest civilization in the world. Dare I say my music is more classical? So pivot on your frame of reference a little bit. So I think we've had an opportunity to engage in that, and to poke what we've always assumed was just inevitable or rational or commonsensical. And I think that's been really interesting. And that's enabled us to think about, like, no, you don't need to give a funding body 500 pages of evidence in order to get your work presented. You can literally write something in 3 days and rehearse it for a week and present it as something imperfect to an audience of one. And I think that's been like really interesting. And we've gotten the opportunity to pivot on a lot of the things that we're thinking through, and also to think about how do we support each other in those really practical ways that I know Julie's thinking through in terms of like fundraising, and that Nick is thinking through from that lens as well. And that we're all collectively thinking through from being there for each other's, like, our own well-being, our mental health, but that of other people and our communities and people who share experiences with us. So I've also been seeing a lot of pivots from institutions towards protecting institutions. And I mean, that's the way the system functions, right? So institutions are pivoting towards keeping themselves operational as organizations. And I think the life of the artist has very much been absent from many interventions that we're seeing. So my question is, how do we care for ourselves and each other as artists, not only in this particular moment, but in our future together? How can we think through things that really care for the well-being of artists and that take into account who the artist is and recognize that that isn't divorced from the art, and that, you know, artists have the responsibility to make us feel something, and that something doesn't have to be beautiful or comfortable, and that we need to create the kind of world that supports artists in doing that, and that doesn't see so many of us struggling despite our impact being, you know, undeniable. So Nick, you want to, I see your...
Yeah, let me jump in just because I saw a question in our Q&A from Marjorie Tewksbury, like that really pulled at that's something I've been thinking about a lot and I think is so important. It's about emerging artists or new artists right now. I gotta say, like, I'm a huge fan of Hamilton. I'm a huge fan of Sondheim, and okay, I like Andrew Lloyd Webber a little bit. It's cool to see like a live stream in their living room of like this or that, or a breakdown of Broadway shows, but like these established artists out there, as we're moving online and they're unveiling themselves in different formats, it's cool, it's fandom, but we really, really, really have to make efforts to showcase emerging artists, and not just emerging, mid-career. Like right now, there is a terror amongst artists who've just had their first professional production or second, or people who are on the cusp, or people who are graduating theater school because they have some momentum and they had some people who were a little bit interested and they had that maybe contract coming up, and now it's gone. And like, I can speak for myself. I have all this work canceled, and there's a part of me that's like, am I ever going to get work again? So I think right now in our efforts, we have to be focusing on showcasing work from emerging or early career artists, and whatever following or clout that we have. And I send this all the way out to Andrew Lloyd Webber, my bud, Andrew Lloyd Webber. Like, sure, showcase your work, get people to your page or whatever it is that you're doing, but then push the work of someone who doesn't have that audience, because I can tell you right now, they're terrified, they're broke, and they have a whole bunch of really good work that's not being seen right now. Rant over.
Thank you so much, Nick, for your passionate contribution there. I think it's a real fear for so many of us that this moment may mean the end of our practice as artists. I think that's something that people have to contend with. And I don't think that's only for even emerging or mid-career artists who obviously have greater risks than like professional established working artists. You know, Rihanna can like record from her living room till the cows come home and like has resources to outlast all of us. So we'll be okay, right? They will be fine. Their practice will thrive. They don't have the same risks that a lot of artists who are early in their career, or artists without institutional support, even if they've been practicing for a long time, because that's the reality of it, is for many artists from marginalized communities, doesn't matter how long your practice is, you're really very rarely seen in that realm of professional, or seen in as of the same caliber as your counterparts who may be practicing more dominant culture art forms, or may even be in the same art form or in the same discipline as you. So definitely, I think that that's a fear, but also we have to think about collectively, all of us, our shared ecosystem. We are in a shared arts and culture ecosystem that at this point, because of the financial, traumatic, intergenerational, racialized, gendered impact of this particular crisis we're all experiencing, there are a lot of artists who will never get to be artists. There are kids who are now currently in subsidized music programs who have access to that music program and a loan instrument, who will not get access to that program because that organization will cease to exist, because there is no capacity to facilitate instrument loans elsewhere. There isn't somebody who can do that advocacy for free anymore, so on and so forth. So I think that's something we have to contend with, the reality that caring for one another means caring for all of our futures together in every sense of the word. Because the reality is so many people who have the capacity to be extraordinary artists are no longer going to see that as a viable option for them. Even, I mean, we already live in a world that says you ain't going to make it if you're an artist, or like, what is your real job, you know, which I get constantly, which I'm like, I legitimately, people occasionally pay me to write things. Like that's the whole shtick. So really being mindful of not framing art as something that we don't need in this new and imagined world, and something that's frivolous or extra. So I turn that question to Nicholas around how are we caring for ourselves and each other in this time and beyond?
I feel like the best way to care for each other is knowing that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And if there's light at the end of the tunnel, we don't have to be running around in fear. I think that anger comes from fear, sadness comes from fear. All of these unwanted emotions stem from one thing: we're afraid. And I feel that the second that we realize that we're all kind of in that same mental boat, we don't have to be as afraid. And opening up conversations like this brings people together, because, I mean, we're serving something way greater than ourselves. Like just the whole umbrella of art in general, we're like a mosaic. Each individual, every single one of us is so particularly special. And that means we each have an opportunity to touch a different type of group. You know, we all come from different backgrounds, and we all know people who may not have as much exposure to the arts as us. And so I feel like that's our own responsibility. Are you able to take the people that you know in your life who do not have exposure? And are you willing to use your time to donate it to someone else that's not yourself? And this is a great time to be selfless, honestly. I can tell you one thing: the days that I spend giving my time to other people are the days that I have more energy than the days that I want to be selfish or lazy. I actually end up more tired when I'm like, you know what? F the world, da, 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 da. You know, there are people who actually do want to hear from you, even though they don't always say it. Also, you have to let people know that you're around too. People are not mind readers. And just because we are all on our cell phones, we assume that they're doing okay, but you don't actually know if they're doing okay. So I have been calling my friends randomly, 2:00 in the morning. Hey, what's up? How's it going? How's your mental health? How's it going? Love you. What's up? FaceTime, let's go. I can't see your face. Talk to me. I'm like, gotta see your face. Let's go. Because people have gotten into this I'm not seen, I'm not heard mindset, I feel, because we're all we feel like we're trapped, but we're really not. We're really not. If this was 1905, it would be something different. We are actually, even though there are difficult things happening in the world, we do have to acknowledge that the faith, I think, can be way stronger just simply by calling someone who you didn't think that you'd be calling. Or, I don't know, this is a great time to break down your ego. Point blank. It's a great time to bust down your ego. Kill it. I've just been working on that. And from doing that, the amount of people that have fallen into my life who need help, and you're just like, wow, this is actually really easy to help people. So when you feel that it's easy to help somebody, you should probably do it, because odds are it's not that it's going to come back around for you immediately, but it provides you a sense of, okay, what has worked for me might work for somebody else, and it might save somebody's life. Like, I've been recommending this EMD art to several people. And my brother, who lives in Brooklyn, he's an artist, talented painter, very talented. But everyone in his building, no one in his building has been able to afford rent. Everyone in his building is pretty much depressed too, because people are dying at an extremely large rate in New York, particularly in Brooklyn. It's like a petri dish right now. And he was telling me, the depression is absolutely real. The anxiety is absolutely real. It's one thing to be an artist, but then it's another thing, like you said, to be an artist at the beginning of your career. And in New York City, you're either super making it or you're super not. And I know what that's like, because I've been in New York City with a job. I've been in New York City without a job. I know what it's like to have to freelance. Like, yeah, I was in National Ballet of Canada, but I also know what it's like to have to work $12 an hour 4 hours a day just to try to pay my rent. So you really want to take the concept that everyone is going through it mentally. And I walked my brother through his first EMDR session yesterday, actually. And he, for the first time, said, "Oh, sorry, I'm stretching. Sorry, I don't care. Oh, this feels so great. Sorry, had to do it. Oops." He said for the first time ever, he feels like I don't have to stand in my own way. So already there's just improvement by just talking about ways to heal each other. I never even heard my brother say that before. So, hey, one person at a time. That's all it takes. One little droplet in the bucket. You can see the reflection of my foot in the, sorry. I'm sorry.
Good. Stretch it out. Live your best life. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can we hear from you and your thoughts about how do we care for ourselves and each other in this moment and beyond?
Sorry, you said me. I didn't hear. Yes. Hi. In a way, I've been thinking, I'm very inarticulate, I feel like, because I'm like very in it, like everyone else, just kind of discovering in this moment. And it's hard sometimes to put the right words or to the sensations. I do feel like in particular, well, to every artist, this is the ongoing task, certainly to people new to this field, trying to make a go of it is always forever be looking at who's in your circles. And sometimes we feel like, when I go into a teaching institution, for instance, with my producer hat on, and I'm talking about self-producing and putting your own work out there, people often will say, but I don't know anyone, like I don't have an audience, and how am I going to fundraise? But starting with your circles, and literally, like we do an exercise where we draw circles. So there's you, who are your core collaborators, who are then the people in that second rung, collaborators you bring in for a specific project. Building out, who are the people you went to school with? Who are the people you work with? If you teach yoga, so the people connected to that yoga studio. If you teach children music, their parents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And somehow I find, just even in the time before this moment of COVID, the exercise of just committing that to paper, for instance, or however you want to do it, drawing it, however you want to do it, makes already you realize, oh, okay, I'm not as alone as I thought. I actually do, if I put work out there, I do have people to direct it to, whether they're interested or bite or not. It's a starting place. It's like a yes and moment. And then the power of people to then advocate for you and become your ambassador. One of the biggest lessons for us as a company in terms of building audience and our donor base has been through the community theater work we've done, just to give an example, by at first volunteering and eventually being able to pay ourselves a small bit of money to run some community theater programs, or even in the moment I've been running a playwriting program for mostly seniors, just for free and for fun, giving them a weekly challenge. But the amount of people then they bring into that circle, by putting something out, you can only expand those circles. And I think that's all there is to do in this moment. If you have that inkling of who is out there, am I just shooting something into the dark? And then your focus, I think, at least I found my focus becomes more targeted based on whatever the creative impulse is. And also, I'll just say the last thing, sorry, I see everyone's nodding, like free ourselves of this notion that we need to reach everybody or that our work is for everybody. Like me, the container of creating 10-minute phone plays for people who want to be on the phone. So that's already a pool of people. And we can only hit 8 or 10 people a night. It's like there's a liberation in that. We're not trying to reach hundreds of people. There's a limitation in how much box office that will bring in. So we have to find other creative solutions to pay ourselves. But the one-on-one, don't underestimate the one-on-one connection in this moment and where that can grow.
Thank you so much, Julie. I'll take this opportunity to transition us into our Q&A because I think folks are asking a lot of relevant questions. I'm going to direct some of these questions to a specific panelist so that we can get a chance to answer as many of them as possible. So I think for this first question, I'd like to ask it to Nick. Nick, we have a question here from a participant who says that, do you think the majority of people you see engaging with arts and culture online now will continue to do so after social distancing ends? audience, and to what degree? I know the future is like this giant question mark, but let us know how you feel about it.
I hope so. I think that we have a lot of artists who are engaging with online art right now, because we already are in the practice of nourishing ourselves through art. For me, it's a little like chicken soup. So I think we have that audience, but I think we are tapping into younger audiences. And I think we also probably don't get as much interaction from some of the folks who are subscribing to larger arts organization. That's a big generalization. I'm sure there's lots of them who do check it out, but I think, speaking from the Social Distancing Festival, a lot of it is more independent and sort of edgy in nature. And so I think we're probably attracting a different crowd. I feel like part of that is the fact that like it's less commitment in a way. Like it doesn't cost $80 to check something out that you might not even like, or that you had one bad experience with in the past, so now you don't want to do it again. So I think we are getting people who are taking more of a chance with the art that they're engaging with. And I think we do have a huge opportunity to transition that into, when we're back enjoying a lot of these things live, learning how we were able to engage those people, to get them to keep having that artistic practice of going and engaging with art. So maybe that means that it needs to be financially more accessible, or maybe that means that we need to be offering things with shorter runs and a bigger array of different people, more festival formats. I don't know. Good question. Like, I think that's something that we're all going to have to stew over a bit more.
Thank you, Nick. I think it definitely brings up the question of like who our audiences are, and also how comfortable our audiences feel in the traditional spaces we've been presenting in. That's been like a really interesting piece for me, is that, there's often an assumption about, for example, about who goes to the ballet, right? And I think when the ballet is now on your Instagram, you see that actually a lot of people go to the ballet, and they're not only a particular kind of people who make kind of donations to the company, who have their name written on the donor's wall, who come to every time the Nutcracker is presented. It's that when the ballet is in my kitchen, my audience looks like a bunch of different people in their kitchens. And all of a sudden, I think it feels more accessible, or it feels like something that people can engage in. And I also think like you don't even know, like you're stunned often about who your audiences are. I participated in, there's an anthology that I wrote in that is called The Breakbeat Poets, which comes out once every few years with a new iteration. And some of us who have written in the anthology had a phone-in cipher, where most of us are rappers and poets, and somebody would literally give us a beat, and that was it. And so one of the people who called into the phone-in cipher the most is an 84-year-old guy who lives in Little Italy, who's been loving it. And he's like, I'm really getting into Nas. And I was like, all right, like get into Nas. Illmatic is something that should be part of everybody's like music library, I think, And like today I was like sending him an email about New York's state of mind. I was like, I finally get to write an email with the subject heading, I never sleep because sleep is the cousin of death. I get to use that finally, me and Nas in the same page. So I think it's really like interesting to think about like how the ways that's been challenging us. And I think it's really interesting to think about who gets access to an exhibiting or presenting space. So that puts us to the next question, which I think I'm going to direct to Julie. Julie, do you see this digital shift as a way for emerging marginalized artists to get more space and break through, or is it still a pretty much enclosed group or practice that shifted into online?
Yeah, absolutely. I do see it as an opportunity. Even I'm just looking on the screen now, I see 130 people participating right now in this panel. And I think about, okay, if we were doing this live in a space, what space would we be in? And okay, a back space of a theater usually holds, max 100, if that, a main space, maybe 200, like there's the opportunity to reach more people on their own terms in the kind of safety of their own space at the moment. And without having to put on clothes or makeup or whatever, but also without, as Nick was saying, like without that kind of commitment to even stay for the whole thing. And I think, though we want people to stay and be engaged, it's a really interesting kind of incognito moment that, you can, even Nick, you were saying earlier, like testing out work that you normally wouldn't take a risk on, also because of that, the effort it takes and the money it might take to access it. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity in this moment, and then how that will translate when things, I don't want to say go back to normal, because I think there will always be who knows, but a new kind of normal, and what gathering means, and what, as you said earlier, what accessibility and consent means. We're going to learn a lot. We're already learning a lot.
Thank you so much, Julie. I really appreciated your insights. I think definitely there's extraordinary opportunities, but I think a lot of other questions that came up from the participants were questions around access to technology and bridging that gap. I think we're learning in an increasingly digital world that access to tech access, tech literacy, and reliable internet access are basic needs, and they're no longer these luxuries. And we have to look at how do we facilitate that access for everybody, so that we are not only replacing what we think of as cultural or order gatekeepers with like technical access gatekeepers. And I think that's like new challenges, and we have the opportunity to think really deliberately and mindfully through these things as we navigate what these changes mean to our practice. So Nicholas, there's a question here that was actually very particularly directed at you, which is, how have you dealt with this virtual situation as a dancer whose practice is body-based?
Oh, that's been a really interesting... I'm laughing because, it really is just like, how do you go from dancing with ceilings that are over 20 feet tall to dancing with ceilings that are 6 feet tall? So firstly, I have decided to focus on everything that does not require me to be expansive in my movement. I've been able to focus on the basics of ballet. Everybody knows that when you start ballet, you start facing the bar. My countertop is the bar. So I'm actually doing great because I'm deciding to just suspend what I think normal should be. Because like I said, this can go into the whole falsehoods thing, suspending the falsehoods of us believing that in order to be ballet dancers, we have to be in a certain location, wearing a certain outfit, dancing to certain music. I give ballet classes to Brazilian funk music on Instagram. Nothing to do with classical music at all. It has to do with musicality, strengthening of your muscles, and being aware of your soul. So, it doesn't have to even be so much about gymnastics. And I feel like that's what's forced us to kind of change. It's definitely forced us to change our perspective. It's become a lot less of modeling and a lot more of, are you actually dancing? Because we don't have much space. And if you're just making poses, there's nothing more boring. Like, to be quite honest with you, there's nothing more boring, and we all know, So this has been a great opportunity for me to just work on small things, strengthening of my toes and my feet, doing stretching. Finally, I have time to stretch. Never really have time because it's like, wake up, do performance, class in the morning, performance, break, another night performance, go home at 11, sleep, wake up, class at 10, 6 days a week. We know how this goes. So I feel that this is a great time to do all those little things that you say you're going to do. Oh yeah, Belinda, I can't wait after my charades. I'm going to do my lunges. You don't actually do them. You just have the charades. Come on. I'm guilty. I know Nick Green's over there laughing. This is muted. Yeah, I know. But you get my drift.
I feel you. I have an email chain I've sent to myself since 2016 full of writing prompts, right?
I've been looking at my own writing prompts.
It's a mythical time, right? Of like when I will like sit down and work through all of these writing prompts. So I definitely feel you on the opportunity here to remind ourselves that for artists, habit will sustain you more than talent, and that there's an opportunity to become like more deeply disciplined in our practice within what is obviously possible for us and at these moments. I know that I wish we had more time to engage with more of the questions that were sent in today. I think some of them were answered in the course of the discussion. At this point, I'd like to turn it back over to some of the wonderful organizers at Myseum, to Nadine. Thank you so much for having us here today and for making this space for all of us.
Thank you, Rania. I would just really love to thank our panelists, Julie, Nicholas, Nick, and of course, Rania, for lending your voices, your faces to this conversation, and sharing your reflections and really and your vulnerability. Yeah, thank you for a wonderful conversation this afternoon. I'd like to thank our audience for joining us today. I'd love to encourage you to learn more about all of our panelists. We have their links online. Please follow us. We'll also be sending out an email through the registration so that you can find out more about the work that they're all doing. And I'd also finally like to invite you to our upcoming programs. We have the second part of the Art in the Time of COVID dialogue next week with people from Club Quarantine, Manifesto, Rise, and the Urgent Music Festival. We also have a program this Saturday that looks to imagine the future of Chinatown through speculative storytelling. So please join us, and thank you all again for a wonderful hour and a half.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye all.
Thank you.